are you born a leader or do you learn how to be a leader? And I think it's probably a little bit of both, right. Yep. But we believe very strongly in giving people opportunities to step in and do new things, and we take some chances on them.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales.
Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. And on this podcast, we connect with construction industry leaders from across the country to share their insights on leadership, as you might assume, personal improvement, and to share practical, tactical tips to help you build trust faster and lead more persuasively. I'm excited to share my conversation with Mr. Joe Jouvenal of McCarthy Building Companies. Joe earned his bachelor's in civil engineering at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg and has taken executive education courses at the Northwestern Kellogg School of Management. He started at McCarthy and navigated his way up the ladder to project manager and project director. He then became the executive vice president of the Southern region, and he led management projects into healthcare, corporate, and municipal sectors. Now, McCarthy Building Companies is number 19 on the ENR list of top 100 contractors in the United States. McCarthy was founded in 1864. That's right, 1864 by Timothy McCarthy, who started his own lumber business in Ann Arbor and started building farmhouses and barns. When his home, a log cabin, burned to the ground, he built his own home. That was in 1877, and it still stands today. In 2002, McCarthy became 100% employee-owned. So it was against this backdrop that I was really excited to speak to Joe Jouvenal as we talked about leadership, as we talked about resiliency and adaptability in such unique, demanding times. Now, at McCarthy, the majority of the employees they have are craft workers. So we talk about how the leadership and communication styles change and the ways that they've adapted to increase communication to craft workers in a way that I found really interesting. And there are some very tactical things that I believe you can take away and implement immediately as well. We talk about the behavioral foundations of the core values at McCarthy, specifically about how and when we give credit. And last, but certainly not least, Joe and I talk about how we can make the business of construction more fun, while admitting that it's very hard and we have to be focused, how leaders can go out of their way to make sure that we're having a fun time on a day-to-day basis. And as we strolled through the office in Dallas for McCarthy, just stopped and talked to a few people there. Not only did we confirm that, yes, they can all identify their top 3 core values, which you're going to hear us discuss that. I was wondering if I could poll specific people, and we did do that. But you can tell they liked each other, just having a lot of fun. And there's a few things that we talk about in there that I saw firsthand. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Joe Jouvenal. As always, thank you for listening. So Mr. Joe Jouvenal, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
Hey, I appreciate you making time, especially on a Friday afternoon. So our normal 6-hour podcast, we're going to dial it down to like half that. So how do you define leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can be a hard one to answer because I really am a firm believer that leadership is kind of like it's a baton that can be passed in some ways. So there are some times that I have to lead, and there's sometimes that I have to follow. And I might be leading or following any number of people that I work with. It kind of just depends on the circumstance. So I thought about it a little bit because that can shape how you define it. And I determined that really what it is someone who is there for their team to help coach or guide the team to the preferred outcome or to reach their goals. Because sometimes there just needs to be a facilitator, somebody that's kind of has their eyes wide open about it, but there often is a leadership vacuum when situations present themselves, and who steps in to fill that vacuum is to be determined sometimes. So I've thought a lot about it. And I think that leadership for us in this business, it's the X factor about whether we are able to do what we want to do or not. And like I said, it presents itself at different times. And that's why it's so important to have a great team, top to bottom, left to right.
No, I think that's a really good answer. I like using kind of the word, the guide in there. As you mentioned kind of that X factor, it just kind of has me curious about how you think about training other people. And just on the way in, we talked to one of your employees, and of course, me being me, I was like, hey, I'm talking to Joe about a podcast. What should I ask Joe about leadership? And she got into this a little bit, and I was very impressed with her. But if it is the X factor, and it's really, you're right. When we started this podcast, I just started Googling leadership. I'm like, what are all the elements of leadership? Well, you're about 40 lines deep, and you're like, okay, whether you're talking about ethics or morals or integrity, or, you can go any direction on this. If it is the X factor, how do you think about coaching and training this in other people to help them elevate their leadership game?
I think it comes down to trust. We hire great people that have all the right core values that line up with ours. And, a lot of times it just comes down to putting people in a situation, stretch them out, give them a chance to lead. I know there's a lot of debate about it. Are you born a leader or do you learn how to be a leader? And I think it's probably a little bit of both, but we believe very strongly in giving people opportunities to step in and do new things, and we take some chances on them. We also really try to lead by example. And in that way, it's important that we don't micromanage people. We kind of set the intent of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get from point A to point B, and we're trying to stay within certain guardrails, but I like to leave it to our folks to decide how they're going to get there. And it's those reps that make a difference. And I think people talk about the gift of feedback. Feedback's so hard to give sometimes, especially when people are working so hard. But to be able to kind of be standing to the side and just ask people, hey, how did you think about doing it this way? Or why did you think about that? And just kind of after the fact, or sometimes during, asking some questions about what they're doing and why. In doing that, it's been kind of fun because I learn a lot all the time, mostly because I believe strongly that we all have a in our mind's eye a way that something should be done, and it's a natural tendency that we all think like, well, clearly it must be the best way if that's the way I think about it.
Sure.
But the truth of the matter is it's not, and we might have some good ideas, but to see the creativity of our young men and women and how they do things is just. I just love it. I just love watching how it all comes together, but it never happens if we don't give them a chance.
Yeah. Well, I can just see like the way your eyes light up and you're smiling as you're talking about this. It's interesting I hadn't really considered from a leader's perspective, putting in people in positions where hey, this is an opportunity to see how they lead. Let's see what happens. And to think of that as a rep, and I think that's really powerful. And a colleague of mine recently pointed out that too often when leaders say, hey, walk me through how you were thinking about that, something bad has happened. And he said, the best leaders that I've worked with is something good was either in the process of happening or it had just happened. And you have more leeway if you ask that question in good times and bad when something totally blows up and you say, hey, geez, Joe, that's not good. Walk me through what you were thinking. If you have a history of saying that when things went well, you have a lot more latitude and probably a lot more grace that they're going to give you and say, hey, let me be candid about, hey, what happened here. So
You're right. But I would say how we react to when the things don't go well really sets the stage for that conversation, right?
Yes.
Because you're right. We can't miss the opportunity to leverage when great things are happening. There's so much value in that. It is life sometimes that bad things do happen. And I expect that people are going to make mistakes. Right. And they know that I expect that they're going to make mistakes. And that's important.
Right.
Because I think about my career, and maybe you think about your career this way sometimes too, where there's these pivotal moments where things just changed for you.
Right.
And, a lot of times we think about like how they got better over time. But I think almost everybody I talk to, they say, oh my gosh, I made just an awful error.
Right.
But I figured out what to do.
Yeah.
And I learned from that. And if we're walking around here making sure people never make mistakes,
Right.
then we guarantee that they will never grow. And that's just not going to work here.
Well, that's really powerful. And I think what you just said is subtle, but really important, is that I know they're going to make mistakes. Every leader does. They also know that they're going to make mistakes.
That's right.
And yet, here we go. We're going to go together, right? And I really like that. The thing, whenever I think about McCarthy, is knowing the history. I knew McCarthy was old, right? I did not realize it was 1864 old. I was thinking, I'm like, I know it was in the late 1800s. I was like, maybe 1890, maybe 1880s. 1864.
Yes.
I mean, it's incredible to me. To what degree do you feel the weight of having a century and a half of tradition and responsibility on you, but at the same time, feeling that you can feel comfortable to experiment and adapt, which you do not get this far as a company that have this legacy if you are not able to adapt to new things? To what degree does that weigh on you, if at all?
Yeah. So the history of our company is a rich one. I don't see that as a burden per se. I see it as an opportunity that we have this rock solid foundation that we stand on. And it's kind of fun because, I mean, gosh, we go through so many times and have gone through so many times as a company of ups and downs. And there's comfort in our company and for our people, even for the little things that we deal with just on a project or whatever, where we always get through it. We've always gotten through it. We will always get through it. It's a mentality that we have that, this is, I'm dealing with this tough issue, a constructability issue or whatever, but it's not World War II,
right.
Or whatever.
Seriously.
Like, it's not that bad, right?
Yeah.
And we figure it out. So we have that perspective.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we're just standing still either. I mean, we started out building barns. So, we very well could have continued. I think people still need barns today, right?
I believe so.
So we could have kept doing that, but we didn't, right?
Yeah.
And we continue to evolve our business because the construction industry has evolved. The opportunities have evolved. Just the whole kind of perception of construction and what that means and looks like and who does it and everything is different. And we've made it, our history revolves around change like that.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you this question. It came up and you mentioned the word fun. And I love construction. I love what we do. I love this. I find it fun. And I wake up every day. I'm like, dude, I'm blessed to be able to do this, right? However, guys that work at other companies, there are other cultures where you're like, hey, these guys are serious. They get stuff done. They build amazing projects. They make good money. I'm not quite sure fun would be an adjective that would be on the top of the list when I would describe them. And maybe I don't want to read too much into this, but I came in, a person who kind of greeted me. There's cake over there. I see the bell that I want to ask you about that is in the shape of Texas. That is literally, I wanted to go clang the thing. Figured that would get me thrown out of here. And there's a phrase that a boss told me, and it's part of our core values, and says, fun ain't free and it never goes on sale. And I think of that in terms of you got to work to make things fun. But if you can combine some competitiveness and expertise, good leadership, and have some fun, you're going to attract great talent and they're going to stay. There's some things that you do deliberately to make sure, we're building great things and we're very serious about it. But at the same time, we're having fun.
This business is not easy, right? It can be complicated work that we do. There's a lot of different personalities. There's outside influences that happen. And I've just always made it a point that why would you want to come into your job and beat your head against the wall? It's already hard enough.
Right.
Why would we want to do that? And I think about teams that I've worked on and how the mentality of the team that was bonded together with a unique mission. So we have this like-minded approach, but having fun while you do it, just gets you through the day, right? Because there's a lot of smart people out there that can get their heads around a mission, but man, it's hard to get up in the morning to go to work just because you can technically figure something out. If you're not having fun, it's not worth it. That's the way I think of it. That's kind of what I promote. Like, a lot of our clients that we work with have similar approaches, and it just makes the days go by quick, for sure.
Well, and maybe that'll tie in a little bit here, but as we were doing kind of our pre-call, you had asked me about Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, which I was familiar with, but I had not purchased and I had not read. And in those situations, when somebody smart says, hey, it's a good book, and we're tying it in, I bought it. I'm going to read this section here that I just want to get your take on it, because I felt it was kind of a especially poignant. He writes, a company built for resilience is a company that is structured to last forever. This is different from a company built for stability. Stability, by its very definition, is about remaining the same. A stable organization can theoretically weather a storm, then come out of it same as before. In more practical terms, a company is described as stable. It is usually draw a contrast to another company that has higher risk and higher performing. The idea of kind of slow growth, but stable. But a company built for stability still fails to understand the nature of the infinite game, for it is likely still not prepared for the unpredictable, for the new technology, the new competitor, the market shift, or world events that can, in an instant, derail their strategy. First, apologize. I know that was a long little quote there. But when I was reading this, it just like hit me by a 2x4 in the forehead. On one hand, it's kind of talking about, and to your point originally, I'm just like, hey, how do we view this? Are we using this as a finite game with rules and competitors? Or are we thinking long-term, and then kind of tying that to McCarthy, 1864, the rich tradition and legacy? How did kind of this idea of an infinite game, how do you think about that in your role as a leader?
How we make decisions here is not about how does this decision that we're making, how does this affect the outcome of this project or how we deal with this client. I mean, we do obviously think about projects and clients in the short term,
of course,
but we're making decisions based on the fact that we're going to be in this market for the next 50 years, in this industry for the next 150 years, like we were. I mean, when you think about it like that, being short-sighted about, wow, we can take advantage of this situation with a client. Let's do it because this job will be great. Maybe that's true, but you may have just burned a bridge with a customer that you will never, ever be able to work for again. And you really liked them.
Yeah.
It was a great experience for everybody. But because we were just looking at one metric on one job, it's gone. It's gone. And, you know, when you're a nationwide company as well, understanding too, not the infinite time on a time continuum, but an infinite sort of geographic look too. The things that we do here in Dallas, Texas have an impact on our partners in San Francisco, California, or Phoenix, Arizona. When you're kind of more broad and you're thinking, we feel like we have better outcomes because of it, because we're able to look past the end of our nose.
Yeah. And that has me thinking just about unintended consequences. And we have kind of this thing we work with on certain clients in certain situations on just how can we think more broadly and be more proactive about some unintended consequences that we might not be thinking about on a big change or a change management process. And ultimately it comes down to being more thoughtful and sometimes, probably going a little bit slower up front, but having that thought about, hey, what are the ripple effects here for the brand, the reputation that could affect? And yes, it's a big country, and yes, there's a lot of projects, and yes, there's a lot of people. Construction's a tight-knit industry.
It's very small.
It's very small, right? So that has me kind of thinking about that. But on the flip side, Joe, I'm wondering, how do you balance that? Because the flip side is, my guess is you have annual goals with your guys. We're setting these short-term project goals, whether it's a year or multi-year goals, and then we have goals we're trying to hit, right? We're trying to be profitable and trying to do the right things to grow the business and all that. How do you kind of balance those? Or maybe a better question, I'll let you take it wherever you want to. How do you explain that the folks that are looking up to you, that are saying, hey, in 5 years, I want to be a leader and I'm going to have to be challenged with balancing kind of the infinite game, long-term, we're going to be in this business for another couple 100 years with, hey man, we're upside down this project right now and we have to get the lawyers involved and we have to handle this and that. Like, how do you balance those two things that seemingly are in contrast with each other?
Yeah. So I don't want to give the impression that we absolutely pay attention to the details and make sure that projects are run properly and so on. But because we are an employee-owned company and because we are in it for the long game, when I'm having conversations with our executive committee, let's say, about decisions that we want to make in this region, that we want to invest in something that's going to have a positive impact on our business 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, whatever that is, everybody in that executive committee understands that we're in it for the long haul.
Right.
And so it's easier to say, we're going to have our profitability is going to dip a little bit from where our goal was. And the reason that it is because we're investing in people, process, opportunity, whatever it is.
Right.
We're investing in that. And here's why. And here's the backup, if you will, right? It's not just a dream or an idea that hasn't been vetted, but here's what we're thinking.
Yeah.
And it is, I don't think that I've ever had this situation yet where there's been a brick wall put up. There's questions, but it's often gets to, okay, that's the right thing for the business in the long term. When you have that kind of a culture at the top, it makes it much easier to say, hey, we're gonna be a little under our goal. That's different than having a publicly traded company that you have outside shareholders and things like that might not look at it in the same way. For them, it's strictly just an investment opportunity. For us, it's our life. It's our business.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, as being a very, very small supplier to some publicly traded companies, and we love them all. They're great. Seeing the ripple effect of that mentality, on one hand, they say, hey, we're long-term thinkers. However, earnings are coming out in 30 days. Here's what I'm not going to pay your bill, and here's why I need you to be okay with it. And you're like, whatever. But yes, totally different mindset. I thought it was interesting, and it totally makes sense, but I hadn't fully thought it through, where you said, as you look at McCarthy as a whole, you have more craft workers than salaried office, et cetera.
Yep.
How does that change your communication style as a leader?
Well, it causes us to communicate through a lot of different channels than we have typically communicated in the past, because not all of our craft workers have email addresses, let's say. Maybe they don't really get on the internet as much to go to an intranet site and see what the latest thing that we've posted.
Yeah.
So we have different channels. We use a software that's a text-based communication tool, which is a great way to get messages across to our craft workforce. They're so important to everything that we do. We self-perform scopes of work on every single project that we do. And in some cases, we self-perform up to 95% of the work on some of the jobs. So it's a huge deal for us to not just to be able to communicate, which is important, obviously, but also engage with the craft workforce and make sure that they know that we appreciate them. And certainly there's the face-to-face opportunities that present itself, but we think we have to use a lot of different forms of communicating to get to them.
And I'm assuming text-based software, multilingual, bilingual as well. Okay. Just curious, kind of dig into that just a little bit. How often are those messages going out, and what might be in them that you say, hey, this is maybe something where 5 years ago, or, when I came here to the Texas market, we weren't even thinking this way, but we're doing this now and it's making an impact.
Yeah. So one of the items that we realized, this is going to just transparency, right? It's just you and I here today.
And millions and millions of listeners, as far as you know.
we realized, we survey our salary workforce. It seems like all the time we have some kind of survey we're asking people to fill out. And we realized, wow, maybe we should survey our craft workforce to see what's important to them, right? Because we were making a mistake where we made assumptions about what they cared about, right? Which is, generalizations are never going to be good. And so we did our I think 2 years ago or 18 months ago, we did our first craft workforce survey. And it was a massive success in terms of responses, bilingual responses we were getting. And what we found, which was interesting, is that our craft workforce wants exactly the same things that our salary workforce wants, right? Which is, it's kind of like a no-brainer. We all happen to be human beings, and we all happen to probably be interested in the same thing. So our craft workforce wants to know more about the company they work for. They want to know how they can make an impact. They want to know where their next opportunity might be coming from. They want to be well-trained. They want to be safe. They want to be all of those things and more. So, we have I think you referenced it earlier in the conversation, maybe we have this kind of ceremonial bell that we ring when we win projects.
If I may.
Yes.
Can you describe what that is? Because when you just told me before, I'm like, oh, they got a bell. And maybe it's a small bell, maybe it's whatever. Explain what that is, because saying that's a bell is like saying a tank is like a vehicle.
Yeah. Well, so we have different kinds of bells in different offices around the country.
All right.
Our bell here in Dallas, Texas is mounted to the wall on a large Texas-shaped base. And the quote unquote bell is a triangle, if you will. It's like
I think of that as like a barbecue dinner time triangle bell. But both of them are massive. And then, it looks like, is it steel? It's the shape of Texas, but then you have the McCarthy logo in it.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it's okay. I took a picture of it because I thought it was awesome.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
So anyway, carry on. So what do you guys do with the bell?
Yeah, so when we win jobs, sometimes it's very sudden, and somebody goes and rings the bell, and everybody stops what they're doing because we won a job, and everybody's excited about it, and we explain about the job depending on the time of day. Perhaps we might have a beverage or two to celebrate, but it's a great opportunity for the team to get together and just recognize a job well done.
Sure.
And a success, really, of everyone. So we realized, wow, this is so good that we do this, and yet we don't communicate it out like we should to our craft. So we send out a text. Sometimes there's a link to a video. We videotape it, but we definitely always share kind of the pertinent information about here's the project, here's what it is, here's when it starts, here's the vital statistics, if you will, about the project. But it's been cool just because it gets everybody then excited about it. And it's like I said, it's in a lot of ways, it's the craft workforce that helps us be able to succeed in winning these jobs. So they need to be part of the success of it as well.
Well, when you shared that with me, the first thought was similar to yours. Just kind of, it's an insight to the obvious. For craft workers, we realize that uncertainty is, hey, this job's ending. Who's out there looking for me to make sure there's not a gap in pay and insurance in between this job and the next job? And that's kind of part of, obviously, preaching the choir here. You live with this. But then you shared this and saying, hey, we're letting them know we're winning these jobs. Here's what's coming down the line. And dude, there's a whole pipeline that's full. And don't you worry. Are we getting that communication all the way to the front line? And after this, I just kind of subtly asked a couple other clients, just curious, what's the communication between your business development team that's working hard, landing deals, flowing all the way through to the craft workers on the job site, when we know we're in this war for talent and we got to retain the best talent we've got, regardless of cultural background or language preference, et cetera. And I've asked two people and both of them are like, that's a great question. And we probably don't do it at all. So I think that's like one of these things that, it's an insight to the obvious, but it could always be done a little bit better. So I think it's really powerful. Yeah.
And I think we want everybody that works at McCarthy to be excited about what we're doing. And there's people that everyone feels proud that the company that they work for is having success. But I think about it too, just from a personal level. So often we have a salaried workforce. They might think like, wow, I don't know what the next job I'm going to, but there's some level of comfort that they know. I don't know where it is or what it is, but I know I'm going to go somewhere and work on another job. I've thought a lot about the stress that comes from a craft worker, that they often don't have that same kind of deep down level of security, that they know there's something else, right? So the stress that comes from that, and this is how they've kind of made a living for themselves. And it's just whatever we can do as an employer to give them a sense of security is, I feel like, even more important than the security that comes with somebody that's sitting here in the office, So we take it very seriously.
Yeah. You've alluded to it. I think this ties into this as well. I'm always curious when I've gotten to know a company or they've been around, we've worked with them personally or alongside them, the espoused values and how they live them. And I looked up your core values, fairly simple. There's only 3 of them, but one of them was we, not I. And it's the belief in the power of teamwork and a consistent habit of sharing credit. How are you guys really deliberate? Because you guys only have 3 core values on your website. One of them is really about we, not I, and giving credit. Maybe go into that a little bit. And how do you foster that with your team?
So we, not I comes from, you've been around this business quite some time, and we've all run into people and they say things like, I built that, right? They don't mean it specifically like that, but it's a way in this business that people often communicate. And it just has always been a sticking point for us. People that say that around here are met immediately with things like, oh, really? You built that? You're just yourself, just you built that, right?
How'd you do that?
So when we came up with these core values, they were kind of like looking in a mirror of, it wasn't, we came up with them and this was who we want to be, though there is some element of that, but they're all based on kind of who we are, right? When we developed them. And there's a book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. He talks about it, that there's things called core values. And a lot of companies have things that are, they're kind of like no-brainer things like integrity, teamwork, community. Yes, all of those things are great. And in fact, we had 8 core values that I can't remember even what they were, but they were things just like that. Yeah. But they didn't paint the picture of who we are. Okay. So it was important that we determined our core values based on who we really were, and they projected our culture and just a real tight perspective on how we act and what we expect. So the idea of we, not I was just about, I think it's somewhat built on the fact that we're employee owners, right? We're all in this together, and we rise or fall together. It's just the way that we operate. And we believe that that's kind of part of the key to our success, in that people that we call them I people that simply do things only to their own benefit or just for their own personal reasons without keeping in mind all their partners, they don't hang around here. They're not successful here. And what's fascinating is it isn't typically a situation where I do something, we kind of move them out. They realize it themselves that the personality of this company doesn't accept that. Everybody, and they're not comfortable in that environment, and they realize that and they move on. And it's kind of self-managed because those core values are so deep that that's just the way all of us are.
Yeah. So. Well, I think there's something smart about having this probably sounds stupid. I'm following that up. Having core values you can remember, but sometimes we'll go in. I was like, you have 11 core values. I said, just curious, which person here could I go to, including the founder, and say, name all of them? And they're like, oh, dude, I can probably get 7 out of 11. But if you got 3, my guess is, it sounds like you were in those meetings, you can rattle them off. But I'm like, again, as long as we can drive a clear line between the values that we have, what they mean, and a behavior that we all can point to and say, this is how we do it around here. I'm like, that's essential. And sometimes that's lost.
Well, and it's so important when we're trying to get everybody to pull in the same direction. That means even behave in the same way. Right. I would bet you, and we can test this when we're done, we could flag down anybody in this office, and if you ask them what our core values are, they would be able to tell you.
Love it.
Yep.
All right, we're going to do that. We'll turn the mics off, but all right. Well, hey, I'm watching the time. You've been very generous here. You've referred to a couple different books, obviously. I talked about The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. You mentioned The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. Any other books come to mind, either if you look in your career that you say, hey, this has been influential, or anyone recent that you've read that you're like, hey, this is on the top of mind that's been helpful for you? I don't want to lose the opportunity other than talking to smart guys and say, is there anything that I should be reading that I haven't yet?
I'm smiling at you because my team just gives me the hardest time about this.
About what?
I am a huge believer in the principles of extreme ownership by Jocko Willink. Yeah, sure. It's something that the process and the kind of the lessons learned from that book, I think apply anywhere, but it just everything applies to me so clearly for construction.
Yeah.
So I talk all the time about extreme ownership, and I just, I think everybody's sick of me, but I don't care. It's great. So that's a big one for me.
Is there anything you can get me rolling? Also a big fan, and revisit the books and use some of his clips and his podcasts and different things. Is there any one principle in there that you're like, this is the one that, the top among many that you refer to often?
Probably the one that I refer to most is decentralized command. And that's just because this business is a lot about how well we tell people how to do certain things, right? How we communicate, do this, do that, very directly in some cases, and often without a lot of wiggle room. And I just, as we have scaled our business, and, I'll get back to the point I made about allowing people to make mistakes and not try to prescribe to them exactly how to do things. I just think our path into the future is about setting expectations, but giving people room to use their own creativity and their own critical thinking. And we can only do that if we're kind of decentralized in how we do things. Because if we're standing over people's shoulder, we're not letting them make mistakes, which I referenced before. But I think that's a game changer for us. I mean, like you, I could go on, but for me, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially as you guys are already huge now, but you scale more. This idea of me looking over your shoulder, being like, actually need you to use your left hand, not your right hand. That doesn't scale. So, well, hey, you did a great job of kind of bringing us back to where we started on many of those things. I've really enjoyed talking to you the multiple times we have here. I appreciate your time. Joe, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, then. How did that go? I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Joe Jouvenal. Now, our goal here is to make this the best podcast you'll listen to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas for future shows, or potential guests, or learn about any sort of thing that you're particularly struggling with when it comes to leadership at your organization. And if you did find this episode with Joe Jouvenal to be worth your time and attention, please share it with your network and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Those mean more to us than you know. As always, thank you for listening. We're going to close out like we always do with our own leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first.